Right. Well, why don't we get started? Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Freeman. I'm a senior director here at JFF. And welcome to our final session of the Postsecondary Network's Better Together series. Today's session is State Policy, Centering Equity in Learn and Work Ecosystem. And before we just dive into the session, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. Dave, if you'll go to the next slide, please. A land acknowledgement recognizes the history of the land we're on and the indigenous people who lived here and still live here. I'm hosting this from my home near Boston, Massachusetts, which is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts nations. I encourage you to open the link. My colleague has put the link in the chat and enter your zip code, and that will allow you to find out about the indigenous people near you. So we'll just take just a minute to do that. And I hope you'll feel free to take that link and share that with others and play around with it. It's pretty interesting. So now moving on to the housekeeping slide, there's just a few things. You are all kept on mute right now, but we are going to have a breakout session. You'll have a lot of opportunity to have questions and answers and talk to our presenters. So at that point, you'll all be off of mute. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is the ecosystem that this entire series has been exploring. We've been exploring, those of you who have been with us have been exploring all of the stakeholders in the center of the ecosystem, and we've explored the entities around the outside of the circle that support the ecosystem, and that's where we are today, looking at state policy. The Postsecondary Network may not know this. I'll run through it, that the Postsecondary Network dates back to 2004. And since that time, it's been a vehicle for collaboration and innovation across postsecondary organizations across the country. At the core of the Postsecondary Network is the Student Success Center Network. Those are entities in 16 states that support innovation across those states, and they represent more than half the community colleges in the country. And they're really a powerful, high-impact vehicle for state innovation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, David. David is with JFF's policy team, and he'll introduce speakers and walk you through plans for the day. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'm thrilled to be with you today. And we have a great session for you, a jam-packed session and lots to cover in this hour together. We're going to start by first giving a kind of an overview of JFF's newly released state policy roadmap for an equitable economic recovery. And we're doing that because it really frames the discussion for today, and our panelists from the 3 states that are with us today really exemplify what we see to be the policy conditions we're looking to create across the country. We'll have an opportunity for our panelists to present on each of their areas or policy and strategies, and then we'll have breakouts to facilitate an opportunity for you to ask your questions and to have more conversation. And then we'll have our closing with some reflection. So as I mentioned, JFF has released the state policy roadmap for an equitable economic recovery. And I wanted to start today by offering some context on why equity should be at the center of recovery efforts. Even before the COVID-induced pandemic, economic mobility was out of reach for millions of Americans, as displayed in these various data points. COVID-19 has only deepened and accelerated these inequities, and they're particularly felt by women, young people, Black and Latinx workers, and non-degreed workers, and those workers in low-wage jobs. At JFF, we believe a holistic approach is needed to achieve an equitable economic recovery. And that we have a kind of a 3-pronged approach that is driving the work of JFF writ large and is in driving our policy work at federal, state, and local levels. We believe it's essential that we help all people rebound and advance, that we revitalize regional economies inclusively, and that we redesign education and workforce development systems. JFF, at JFF, we believe policy action is essential for creating the conditions for an equitable recovery. And despite, or perhaps due to, all the federal stimulus efforts, states have a unique and important role in developing out these policy conditions to reach the people and the places that need the help the most. Our state policy action plan is guided by these 4 principles. And really, these are the 4 principles that are guiding all of our policy work at JFF. We believe policy should be intentionally designed to drive upward mobility, to close equity gaps, to build on what works by scaling evidence-based strategies while also catalyzing innovation, and that it should be intentionally designed to integrate and coordinate systems to ensure that we're providing comprehensive approaches to complex problems. And in that way, our policy roadmap very much feeds into the purpose of this web series about Better Together, where we're working across the ecosystem. Recognizing that each state is in a different starting point, we have intentionally designed the roadmap to provide a continuum of different policy options for states, from planning phases to reforms of current systems to re-envisioning and transforming the ways that we serve our communities and our constituents. State policymakers and those who seek to influence policy decisions can apply the roadmap in a variety of ways. Here are 3 strategies that we think that we would encourage everyone to take into consideration. 1, the roadmap can guide short-term actions for recovery, including the use of the federal stimulus funds I referenced. 2, it can help set a longer-term vision for resilient, diversified, and inclusive economies. And 3, it can be a tool for assessing current policy conditions and systems to chart pathways for major reform efforts. So what's in the roadmap? In the next 3 slides, I outline the major issue areas covered in JFF State Policy Roadmap. Below, you'll see that I've highlighted a few examples from state and local areas. For the purposes of time, I'm not going to elaborate on those examples, but I would welcome you to open up the roadmap and review the sections to learn more. So first, as you might remember, there were 3 major pillars for what we believe is needed for an equitable economic recovery. 1, around helping people rebound and advance. We've outlined 4 strategies that we believe are essential for state policy action: skill building and credential attainment, career exploration and navigation, innovative financing to pay for education and training, and strengthening financial and social supports. The second pillar is about impacting places. We need to build inclusive regional regional economies. And to do that, we've offered 4 strategies. 1 is to take an inclusive approach to economic development. 2 is to invest and expand quality jobs. 3 is to develop regional sector strategies. And 4 is job generating investments. And finally, our third pillar is impact on systems and the need to redesign education workforce development systems so that we're sure they're relevant and responsive to the needs of workers, learners, and businesses. Here we feature 3 strategies: accelerating efficient pathways to credential attainment, skills and competency-based approaches to education, and integrating work and learning. There's a lot in the roadmap. I invite you to go to this link to dig in, and also we certainly invite you to contact JFF's National Policy and Advocacy team. We'd be happy to talk with you about these plans and what we've learned in the field. So now we're going to bring in our panelists to the conversation, so they'll have an opportunity to share the innovations occurring in each of their 3 states and the work that their organizations are undertaking, and how policy, in particular state policy, have helped to create those conditions. We are featuring 3 states, Colorado, Virginia, and California. And after the presentations and in the breakouts, we'll be sharing, there'll be opportunities for questions and discussion. Today, we're joined by Dr. Asho Low, who is a Vice Chancellor of Educational Services and Support at California Community College's Chancellor's Office. And in that role, she's responsible for transfer and non-credit curriculum, technology strategic planning, global education, special project management, and system-wide technical assistance delivery. We're also joined by Sharon Morrissey, who serves as Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic and Workforce Programs at the Virginia Community College System. And in that role, she's responsible for state-level coordination of credit and non-credit programs, student success initiatives, research and reporting, federal program administration and policy review, professional development for Virginia's 23 community colleges. And we're also joined by Lee Wheeler Berliner, who's the Managing Director of the Colorado Workforce Development Council. And in that role, Lee manages the execution of strategies to develop and sustain an industry-led talent development system in Colorado. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome you to go off mute as I pose this first question and first to Sharon to kind of set up the context for our conversation today. And thinking about economic recovery and making it equitable, what is the why for your state and your organization?
Thank you, David. In the Virginia Community College System, we spent the year of the pandemic planning for a very uncertain future, as I'm sure all of you did as well. Our work was influenced by 3 factors. First, the impact of COVID-19. It's changed everything we do and how we do it. So we're not going back to business as usual. The second factor that influenced our planning year was trying to better understand and prepare for the future of work, which we believe is going to look quite different from what we were used to before the pandemic. And third, the crisis of racial injustice in our society and the inequalities that result from centuries of systemic racism in America. We know that the people most impacted by the job losses resulting from the pandemic are people of color and women, as David has already shared in his slides. We know that by the end of 2020, half of all dislocated workers who were white had recovered employment, compared to just 1/3 of those who were Black. And there's a new report out just this week that shows that unemployment rates for Blacks and Hispanics continues to outpace the unemployment rate for whites. So after a year of planning, we, the Virginia Community College System, we are coming out of the pandemic with a bold, new 6-year strategic plan called Opportunity 2027 that seeks to eliminate gaps in student outcomes over the next 6 years, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic status. This plan, if accomplished, will increase access to opportunity for all Virginians, and that is our why.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sharon. That's a bold action, and thank you for Virginia's efforts in leading in that space. Aisha, I want to turn to you. What is the why in California and in the Chancellor's Office?
Well, thank you very much for that, David. And similar to what Sharon was just saying, it really is this holistic focus on putting our students first and the needs of our students first. And so a lot of our why is really about what we're calling in California not just recovery from COVID and all of the many impacts that COVID has had across our state, but really an equitable recovery plan. So we've spent a lot of time during this COVID year in a state-led effort coming out of our governor's office to really dig into what would that look like? What does it mean to not just recover, but to equitably recover? And how do we start to move forward bold policy changes, take some risks within that process so that we can close those persistent gaps that we knew existed before COVID, but COVID just sort of elevated them, exacerbated them in ways that called our attention at higher levels, similar to what Sharon was saying. All then of the racial unrest that took place in 2020 also just called us to lean in and to pay closer attention to gaps that we know have existed for many years. And so that's really our why as a state. We want to not just recover, but to recover equitably. And we want to be the generation that can say, we instituted the policies, we made the changes that actually started to diminish some of those longstanding gaps based on people's demographic backgrounds.
Absolutely, Aisha. This is indeed, a generational, once in a generational opportunity here with all the stimulus dollars to make a big and bold change. Lee, turning last to you, what is the why in Colorado?
Thanks so much, David. Here in Colorado, our governor has a bold focus on building back stronger from this pandemic. Prior to the onset of the pandemic in 2020, our data was continuously highlighting the fact that we were seeing continued disparities in employment outcomes and in educational attainment across different racial and ethnic groups. And we started to conceive of this idea prior to the pandemic of creating a talent equity agenda that would really shine the right amount of focus on that topic and catalyze action by state agencies, by local partners, and by private industry and business as well to make substantive change in their communities. As we think about what recovery means in the context of the pandemic, that focus on equity continues coming from our governor. In August of 2020, he released an executive order that really highlights the fact that our why and our belief is that we will only reach our potential as a state when all Coloradans can live, work, learn, play, and thrive in healthy, inclusive, and equitable environments. And we're truly seeking to build ladders of opportunity throughout the state. And through that executive order, the governor was able to mandate that state agencies take specific steps to become a model employer. And through that body of work, our entity is then able to establish a lot of credibility to work with private employers and others to promote an equitable economic recovery that is grounded in the work that we're doing ourselves.
Thanks, Lee. So now we're going to kind of drill into the specific issue areas that Virginia, California, and Colorado are leading on and that are exemplified, that we see as exemplars in the JFF state policy roadmap. To just provide a little bit of framing for that, I'm sharing some details of the roadmap on each of the areas that they will drill into and what their states have done. So the first two areas, and this will go, we'll bring in Lee in a moment to talk about Colorado, have to do with career exploration and regional sector strategies. At JFF, we believe states must offer universal career navigation services that are tech-enabled, place-based, advancement-driven, and available to workers and learners in real time so that they can make informed decisions about employment and educational pathways. We've offered policy recommendations that touch on data, cross-sector partnerships, the need for technical assistance, and development of new platforms. In addition, we're calling for support and investment in scaling of the use of regional sector strategies to strengthen talent pipelines, close skill gaps, and limit workforce shortages in industries and occupations critical to regional economic recovery and resilience. And very similar to career navigation, actually, many of the same policy levers are pushed around data, around cross-sector partnership, around making sure that we're providing targeted supports for vulnerable populations. So next I'm going to turn to Lee, and he's going to walk through for the next few minutes the work of Colorado. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David, and I'm excited to share on these topics with you all. I just like to start with what the vision of the CWDC is, because what you see in these words is that it has always been two-part, a focus on employers and ensuring that we're meeting the demands of our economy and the support of individuals. Ultimately, when those two mesh together, we see that economic prosperity. And these values, I want to mention, were adopted in January of 2020. So very timely in terms of thinking about agility and what that has looked like in this past year. And equity is right there in the center of the work that we're seeking to do. The next slide highlights that our work across different agencies and with local partners is grounded in data. We believe in a demand-driven talent development system, and we believe in a data-driven and data-informed approach. And we utilize an annual talent pipeline report to track trends over time across these topics, to make informed decisions about the work that we're seeking to do, and ultimately to make policy recommendations. And this talent pipeline report was the result of state legislation. Policy back in 2014 created a group to do this initially. And then part of every year's report is new policy recommendations for how we can advance our work based on what we're seeing in the data itself. If you go to the next slide, it highlights the talent equity agenda that I referenced earlier. And this is a document that we published in September of 2020, which calls for targeting resources, raising awareness, and accelerating our shared strategies to ensure that we can close racial economic disparities in the state and then ultimately measure those results for the work that we're trying to do. The way that this equity agenda came together was a bottom-up approach, working with our stakeholders and working with communities to understand what they were already doing and where they believed they could make a significant impact. The next slide highlights the 5 different focus areas of this talent agenda, and these connect directly to these 2 themes that David referenced. Career navigation and advancement is at the heart of this in a specific focus area. If we want to ensure that we can close disparities within our state, we need to ensure that everyone has access to the right resources, that they can get information that is meaningful for them in a timely fashion, that they understand how to utilize that information in the best way possible to make informed decisions about their future. If you look down at the bottom, the concepts of equitable hiring, compensation, and promotion are really about employer-driven strategies. And so a good part of what we're seeking to do is to work with employers through our network of sector partnerships to ensure these things can happen and they can play out statewide. The next slide gives a high-level overview of the My Colorado Journey platform. And this is the next generation platform that we've developed to be our resource for career and academic exploration. And the genesis of this tool came from recommendations in our talent pipeline reports to ensure that we can get information out to Coloradans in the best way possible, that our policies around requiring planning and requiring certain activities at the high school level and supporting activities in the workforce and through different workforce programs, that there was a common resource that people could look to. And so My Colorado Journey has been designed to provide highly personalized pathways to opportunity and then also to provide support to individuals. A significant number of the features can be utilized by an individual all by themselves with self-guided navigation. And there's also the ability to connect in with a professional. One of the things that we see plaguing Colorado, and I'm sure is similar in all your states across the country, is the very large ratio of students to counselors in the K-12 setting and the post-secondary setting as well. And so when our professionals have a tool that they can utilize to augment those in-person conversations, we see ultimately much better outcomes and choices being made by our students. The next slide just highlights the different makeup and components of the system itself. There's a personalization engine to capture some amount of information about an individual and get them on the path that they want to pursue. The concept of the content framework is driven by outcomes, goals, and steps, and ensuring that we're delivering the best possible information to guide someone on their journey towards success. And ultimately, this is integrating a number of tools that had been existing throughout the state of Colorado. One thing that is a theme in policy is that silos can get developed far too easily. And through My Colorado Journey, we were able to integrate a number of different sites and platforms and specific tools that had been developed from a piece of legislation in this year and a piece of legislation in another year and get them into one place for our constituents. The next slide just emphasizes that we have multiple users who are going to be accessing this system. So ultimately, the benefits are reaped by the individual, and at the same time, there's professionals who can access this, whether that's a job coach in an American Job Center, a counselor within a post-secondary setting, a parent, another resource in the community. Multiple people can get eyes on how they can support someone within their journey. And I want to emphasize that My Colorado Journey has really been set up to support the individual. We're migrating into a direction of how it can best support employers as well. Because as I stated at the beginning of this, Colorado has always believed in having a demand-driven talent development system. And the next slide highlights the way in which we have developed our sector partnership network to be that driving force of engagement with businesses on a regional industry level. So if you think about the top right of that grid as where I'll kind of start and walk around in clockwise order, our sector partnership approach requires a depth of business and industry engagement. We have to have co-champions from businesses to start up a partnership, and those business leaders are the ones driving the agenda. The next generation sector partnership model that we deploy is different from a lot of other approaches because it's not about a government idea, and it's not about an entity saying, hey, we have grant funds and the grant requires that we talk to a business, so can you guys come and talk to us for a few minutes? It truly is about engaging businesses and industry to understand what their needs are and what directions they want to go. This work has been growing since 2005, and we have added in embedding career pathways into the work of our sector partnerships so that we're meeting the needs of sector partnerships and industries based on whatever they identify and delivering career pathway development from a systemic and a programmatic level to ensure that their talent needs are going to get met. And we support that with concepts and practices and technical assistance so businesses can adopt the strategies put forth in the talent pipeline report and in the talent equity agenda, and that we have the right amount of technical assistance that is delivered. And so that's where the supportive state engagement comes in. Businesses want to lead in these arenas, is what we've seen. Businesses want to solve problems and figure out what they can do. And the role of government, the role of educational entities is to walk alongside them and support that in the best way possible. So that's by supplying data, that's by looking at legislative opportunities and promoting policies that we believe can decrease some of these barriers and augment and supplement work. And I also want to state that whenever we are looking at legislation that references business and industry in some way, we point to our sector partnerships as a vehicle for engagement. Rather than creating new and separate and distinct advisory boards, we're looping them into new policies as they come online. And through this body of work, it has created more than 30 active partnerships in 14 different regions throughout our states. We have 9 specific industries. We've seen this primarily most active in healthcare and advanced manufacturing, and we know the model can work in a lot of other contexts as well. And so it's through this concept of really believing in following the demand of businesses, looking at the data, and combining those to make really good policy that has driven our work in Colorado. David, thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Lee. Next, I'm going to turn to Sharon to talk about some new work that's emerging in Virginia around skill building and pathways. And again, this relates very much so to key areas of JFF state policy roadmap. At JFF, we believe that states must provide rapid skill building and credential attainment strategies that are aligned to in-demand career paths, especially those involving skills that prove to be most valuable for post-COVID labor market. And we've offered policy recommendations around coordinating and aligning uses of funds, ensuring quality of skill building and credential strategies, reforms to unemployment insurance, and scaling up the use of kind of career-focused college promise programs. Also, we believe at JFF that states must forge accelerated, efficient pathways that provide all learners, especially members of underserved and underrepresented populations, with opportunities to acquire skills and credentials that are valued in the labor market. And here we point to the opportunities in policy to set equity-minded goals, to map pathways across systems and support the various actors in implementing those pathways, developing on-ramps and off-ramps to ensure that everyone can kind of bridge into programs and that there are stackable pathways along the way, and to consider ways of developing shared accountability and incentives across systems to ensure pathways remain durable and seamless. So I'm going to turn to Sharon, who's going to talk about what's happening in Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about a new policy measure in Virginia that is being championed by our governor that will help people upskill quickly to get back into the workforce. Next slide, please. The new policy initiative is a tuition-free workforce education program called G3. Get skilled, get a job, Give Back. It was funded by the General Assembly earlier this year, and it goes into effect on July 1. To be completely honest, this G3 program was funded by last year's General Assembly after 2 years of advocacy. When the governor declared a state of emergency because of the pandemic, all new funding was unallotted. So we're very grateful that the General Assembly came back this year and fully funded the program. Next slide, please. So G3 provides last dollar funding for tuition, fees, and books for low and middle income Virginians. And low and middle income is defined as a family income of equal to or less than 400% of the federal poverty level. So for example, a family of 4 at around $100,000 with a family income of around $100,000 would be eligible for G3. Next slide, please. There are 5 targeted career areas that were designated in this piece of legislation because they're in high demand and or they are of very high value in Virginia. These are the 5 targeted career areas. Our colleges will be offering both non-credit fast forward training programs that lead to industry certifications in these 5 areas, as well as the traditional certificate and associate degree programs. Next slide, please. So our colleges spent 2 years engaging employers and creating stackable credentials for our workforce associate degree programs. In order to, we actually started this work because we wanted to create these stackable credentials to better meet the life challenges of our adult working students. And then when G3 came along, the idea, the concept, when the governor's office reached out to us about G3, we realized what a great opportunity we had to integrate our new stackable credentials, which are designed around the life challenges of working students, into the G3 initiative. We also flipped the programs. So we're putting skills first in these stackable credential programs. In the very first semester, students get hands-on skills training. In the very first semester, they get enough skills training that they can get a job, an entry-level job at the end of that very first semester. So they can get a job, start earning money, and continue on to another credential level or towards completion of the associate degree without having to repeat coursework along the way. And some of these programs also have pathways to 4-year baccalaureate degrees. Next slide. So here's the amount. The Commonwealth of Virginia is investing $36 million a year to pay the last dollar for tuition fees and books for eligible students. But one thing that I advocated for and that our legislative leaders and the governor's office supported is that full Pell, students who are on full Pell then would not be eligible for any of this grant money. But we all know that Pell does not provide sufficient resources to address cost of living for those very low income individuals. So we advocated for an incentive grant of $2,250 per year for any student who is receiving full Pell and enrolls full time. So that's additional money to help address cost of living expenses, such as transportation, childcare, food, and housing for that student. So that student maybe can drop one of those part-time jobs that they have. Next slide, please. But that's not all. I feel like that person in the TV commercial who says, but wait, there's more. We talked to our legislative leaders about needing more advisors on the ground because, like colleges all over America, we just don't have enough advisors. And we said we really need people to provide career guidance. When individuals walk in our front door, we need sufficient advising staff to help them make the right career decisions. So the General Assembly gave us an additional $5 million to hire 60 full-time G3 advisors for the upcoming year. These are recurring funds, so we will hire another 60 advisors next year, and so on until we have a sufficient cadre of advisors across our community colleges. And then finally, we have a partnership with or an MOU with our Department of Social Services. We are the SNAP 50/50 education and training provider, and we get to match, do the SNAP 50/50 match, which provides federal funding for our community colleges. Our presidents voted, and the first thing we're using that money for is to deploy single stop on every community college campus. And we've in fact just finished rolling that out. Next slide, please. So I want to talk for just in closing about G3 being a catalyst for systemic innovation and equitable recovery. We've got these tuition-free pathways, so we're increasing access to programs that lead to high-wage careers in the health sciences and in IT and manufacturing for unemployed and underemployed individuals. So this is definitely an equity strategy. We're also, the stackable credentials component allows us to accelerate students' entry into the workforce. We recognize the need of low-income students to have more funds to cover cost of living expenses. And I guess one of the things that's most important in this whole scenario is we're going to have a qualified talent pipeline to fill high demand jobs that will sustain the economic prosperity of Virginia. So you can imagine that when we rolled out the G3 concept, businesses have rallied around this, industry leaders have rallied around this in amazing ways. And so we're very grateful for their support. And in my last slide, I want to talk a little about pathways, because there's something very fundamental here that I want you to understand. We would not have been able to do the work that we did with G3 and stackable credentials had we not already invested in guided pathways. And I think my message to everybody is guided pathways takes a long time. We actually started the implementation of guided pathways in 2014, and I would say we're still working on it. We spent 2 full years providing professional development to our colleges to increase their understanding of why it's important to shift from the cafeteria model, which they had been using forever, to the guided pathways model. But because we had done that groundwork, because we had laid that foundation, when it came time to talk about stackable credentials within our associate and applied science degree programs, our colleges were ready to take that on. Another example that I will give you is the work that we're doing in transfer pathways. In 2017, we received a huge piece of legislation from the General Assembly, a huge mandate to fix the broken transfer pipeline. There was an audit conducted of transfer that revealed that on average, transfer students enrolled in 20 more hours to complete a bachelor's degree than native students. So we received a grant and technical support from the Aspen Institute for an initiative called Transfer Virginia. And we spent the past 3 years working with our public and private university partners to create 3 stackable transfer pathways. So there's a 15-hour passport that is designed primarily for high school dual enroll students. So they actually have a pathway that counts instead of just taking a bag of credits here and there. Following that is a 30-hour general education block that will transfer to all of the universities. And we're in the process now of mapping pathways to majors for students who complete their associate's degrees. So interestingly enough, during the pandemic, our colleges embraced these pathways models as opportunities to rethink how we design and schedule and deliver programs so that we can accelerate completion, so that we can meet the needs of the students that we serve today, and so that we can get people on their pathway either to transfer or into the workforce more efficiently and effectively. So thank you for giving me time to share the Virginia story with you today.
Thanks, Sharon. It's really exciting, and congratulations on all the investments that are being made in the Commonwealth. So before turning to our third and final panelist, Asho Low, just wanted to again reference some work of the state policy roadmap that she'll be elaborating and what is happening in California. And that is a focus on skills and competency-based approaches. At JFF, we believe states must develop a skills-based education employment infrastructure that embraces outcomes-focused innovations and recognizes people's skills, no matter where and how they acquire those skills, as the principal measure of how much they've learned, the credentials they're qualified to receive, and the ability to do a job. And in here, some common themes, as you've heard me say already, we think there's a lot of implications around data and data usage. There is some key policy reforms that need to occur to enable scaling of competency-based education and prior learning assessments. And we see there's an opportunity to really do some transformational change by supporting the development of passports, which you can learn more by reading in the roadmap. So I'm going to turn to Aisha to learn more about all the work that they're doing in California with really with the learner front and center to become a student ready and on their student and the teaching and learning reforms. Aisha?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, David. So as you're seeing here for the California Community Colleges, sort of picking up where Sharon left off with guided pathways, that is essential for the work that we are doing here in California. As Sharon said, it is a process. It is no easy work, in particular for our system. We have 116 colleges, 73 districts, and 2.1 million students. So with our size being the largest system of higher education in California, it's been essential for us to really institute some reforms so that our system can play the role that we believe our system should be playing as being a key contributor to the economic recovery of our state. And so part of what you're seeing here in this graphic is how we as a state are really aligning the guided pathways, a framework, along with our goals, our vision for success as a system. And the key levers we really utilize as a state chancellor's office around policy, fiscal reform, and a number of programs that we support as well. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, our Chancellor Elo Ortiz-Oakley, has set very high goals for our system of ways in which we want to see outcomes improve for students. As I said in the earlier opening segment, that is our why. Students first, their needs first, ensuring that our system is supporting our students in transforming their lives. And so we've set some very important vision for success goals around increasing credential attainment and transfer, around decreasing unit obtainment, which is a place where guided pathways is particularly helpful. We do have students who are taking excess of 30 plus units on their way to an associate degree. And guided pathways is essential to transforming that, right? So students have an individualized educational plan, know what to take, in what order to fulfill their academic goals, and as well as meet their career goals, so that they're not floundering and just taking classes in that more cafeteria model. Also looking to increase employment for our career and technical educational students, wanting to ensure that when students are earning a credential or certificate in a particular field, they are then getting a job in that particular field. And then a very important focus for us around closing equity gaps, in particular closing equity gaps for our racial groups that have persisted for many years, but also closing some regional equity gaps that we see substantial differences in student outcomes depending on the region across our state that students are attending. Next slide, please. And so how are we doing this work? It would take many, many hours to overview all of the various initiatives that we have moving forward in California. So really just focusing on some key priorities that began in 2020 that continue on in 2021. Guided pathways, of course, being top of the list there. equitable placement, which I'll dig more into and provide more details. Also, a number of initiatives moving forward around funding. We have an initiative that is being implemented right now called the Student-Centered Funding Formula, shifting our state apportionment funding process from being based on enrollment to being based on students' outcomes, so that colleges will actually receive more funding the better job that they are doing of ensuring that students are retained, that they are completing, and that they are transferring and being successful. A lot of work around financial aid and basic needs, as Sharon talked about, recognizing that the current financial aid systems and processes do not account for the true cost of college, particularly difficult for our students here in California. We are a very expensive state. And as a system, we serve a very high percentage of older working adult students, students who need some of that basic needs support to ensure that they aren't missing out on the opportunity to upskill, to get a degree, to transfer because of the lack of things like transportation or childcare. So a lot of focus there. And then where I'll focus also in particular on innovations in teaching and learning, in particular looking at competency-based education and prior learning assessment. Next slide, please. So equitable placement, this has been a very important and historic reform for our system. This was catalyzed by legislation, AB standing for Assembly Bill 705, that was passed in 2018. It was a long time coming. There were lawsuits back in the 90s, lots of research that took place to get to this moment of the passage of AB 705, or as we're now calling it, equitable placement, really focused on opening up access to transfer level courses for students and really dismantling what had been structures of racism and classism that were holding students back. This policy reform made important stipulations around the expected time to enrollment and completion for students. So for students getting access to those gateway math and English courses, this law now stipulates that students must enter and successfully complete those courses within 1 year. Then for our students, our ESL students, English as a second language, this law stipulates that ESL students who have identified a goal of degree or transfer must enter and complete those important gateway math and English courses within a 3-year period. Important information and requirements within this law about placement, what is to be used for placement, requires that we primarily use high school data. And whereas before we had a robust set of assessments that students had to take for placement in English and math, if a student is a high school graduate, it is the expectation that they are placed based on that information into transfer level English and math. We only still allow assessments for what we call our true ESL population, our international students, recent immigrants, refugee students, and students of that nature. And then also really setting a standard of proof for our colleges and districts that if students are being placed below transfer level, data from the college must substantiate that that placement is better, that that placement is increasing the likelihood that the student will enter and complete transfer level within the designated time frame, or data that presents that that student is somehow highly unlikely to be successful in their transfer level course. So massive overhaul for our system. Again, really established first based off of data, research, and information, having all of our colleges submit adoption plans with a 2-year innovation window for implementation. We're actually coming to the close of that 2-year window for English and math, where now colleges are required to submit validation data, and we are ultimately leaning into the enforcement of this law. Next slide. So with equitable placement, because we are getting to the close of that 2-year innovation window, we do have some initial results that have been very promising. Even though we are barely into implementation, we are already seeing strong results for our students. So early research is showing us that this has had a positive impact for our students. Highly substantial, larger numbers of students are entering those courses and successfully completing those courses. And we're seeing that no matter what their high school performance was, and we're seeing that across all of our subgroups. So for example, just in transfer level English, we've seen increases from 38 to 96% in access, and in math from 21 to 78%. And then similarly for completion rates, we've seen increases in completion rates in English from 27 to 61%, and then 14 to 40%. So still plenty of room for growth, much work that needs to be done, but this has definitely had a significant and positive impact on our students. And now we're really shifting our colleges and our districts to shift from legal compliance to really leaning into Pillar 4 of guided pathways, ensuring learning and understanding that the first step in ensuring equitable learning is placement and making sure students have that access. Next slide, please. Another important area for us right now in California for the community colleges is really innovating around teaching and learning and understanding that that is an essential part of making sure that the guided pathways framework is actually successful and absolutely essential to fulfilling the goals of the vision for success. And so you see here two core efforts that we're moving forward among many others that we don't have time to talk about. When we talk about prior learning assessment, we have called that in California credit for prior learning. We have established new regulation within the state of California that every community college district must institute a local credit for prior learning policy. Those policies will include some of the historical prior learning assessment methods that we are familiar with, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and things of that sort, but also having faculty in particular lead an effort to create exams, create portfolio assessments to allow students to demonstrate mastery tied to specific courses and tied to the learning objectives of those courses. We see this as an essential equity policy. We know that in order to serve those working adult students, our military veterans, and really the millions of Californians that have some college but no degree, we have to find ways to give credit for the knowledge, the information, the skills they're coming into our system with to help clarify and expedite their path. Similarly, with competency-based education, our Board of Governors last November approved a set of regulations for competency-based education so that that is now an approved method of degree creation, eligible for state apportionment. That, again, similar to what Sharon already shared around stackable credentials, is really about flexing for the reality of students' needs. Our older working adult students need that flexibility to engage in learning at 9 p.m. or on a Sunday afternoon. They need that flexibility to be able to pause their progress when life happens without that derailing their academic performance. And so that's what we're hoping to achieve with competency-based education. Our focus now on a state is on a statewide pilot of that, which we're calling the CPE Collaborative, where we are going to be working with a small group of colleges, very hands-on, really more of a professional learning community to walk through the process of establishing the first ever direct assessment CBE degree programs for our system and learning from that process so that we can ultimately create a framework or a manual for all of our colleges to use to further proliferate CBE in our system. Last slide then. So this really is really our guiding framework for system improvement and change, that it is based in evidence and research. We spend a lot of time investing in making sure that we're researching what the best practices are, and that as we implement and bring things to scale, we continue to collect data for that continuous improvement. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And as I had a feeling might be the case, because I knew we had so much good information to cover across our 3 states, that we are short on time. So unfortunately, we won't be able to do breakouts today, but we invite you as we close today's meeting to answer this question either in the chat or in our Mentimeter process that we've just listed there. And I also would invite if our panelists are amenable to it, to put their contact information in the chat, so people that do have questions, want to follow up, have a way of doing that. So we'll take a couple moments here and see if anything comes through the Menti process. And I'll as we're doing that, if my colleagues at JFF, if there's any observations that were shared in the chat or thoughts that come to mind for you that you'd like to share, happy to do that.
Dave, this is Taylor. Hi, everyone. Great to be here and great to hear from you, wonderful speakers. I think this is such a basic comment, but it's just it's so great to see state efforts this way, and it just shows that when there is state support, best practice can just be scaled at a larger level and increase the impact for those that need it most. And so just hearing that your states are committed to this work and those approaches just gets me excited about the scalability of these approaches, and then also how that can then influence even federal policy to scale even further.
Completely. This is Jenny, and people have. I wanted to point out the Menti has a link in the app easier than going to list it on the screen. I too that mentions here that CBE is a lever for equitable economic advancement. Absolutely, we sat in the same way, and I'm really thrilled to see that California and others are handling CBE in that way. You know, CBE is a model that looks at skills, not time in the classroom, so it makes sense that that is going to be a more equitable route for people, especially people who are needing to get into the workforce quickly or are already there and need to get to the credential quickly.
In the roadmap, I'll just say we have more examples from other states that you may want to take a look at. And we will follow up from this meeting with the recording, with the slides, and also some related resources that will help you look into these issues more.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, Dave, if we are a minute out from the end of our session and also the end of this entire series. So for those of you who have been with us from the beginning, we're delighted you've been with us. For those of you who just learned, I'm glad to see that this was such a rich learning experience right now. I want to thank all of you for engaging, for sharing your perspectives. Really, really thank all of our speakers. The last year, each of the speakers have been phenomenal. The last year has really brought an unprecedented need to pivot and develop flexible, strategic, and thoughtful approaches like the ones we heard about today. And I want to just point out that through the Postsecondary Network, we'll continue our focus on equity and strategies for economic mobility to meet the needs to support thriving communities for everyone. And you'll continue to hear from us. This is not the last time this year. In the very immediate future, I want to point out, Dave, if you would jump forward to the ecosystem slide. I just wanted to point out that we have developed this tool. Some of you have already jumped in to beta test it. For those of you who have not, take a look at this tool. It is a way for you to help support communities, support stakeholder partnerships in your communities. So we'll be reaching out to those of you who have to form kind of a community practice around that beta test. So thank you so much. It was wonderful to kind of learn and grow along with you. Thank you again to all of our speakers. And be sure to follow us, follow through JFF's social media channels. That's another way to kind of continue to get resources and ideas and hear about innovative practices. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you to our panel. Really appreciate it, Sharon, Lee, and Aisha. Goodbye.